Hey, I'm Dietec, and I have a GTX 1080 Founders Edition that I want to put inside of this computer behind me, but the paint job on the graphics card as it comes from the factory doesn't match up too well with the paint job that I have going on inside of my computer, so I've decided to take it apart and paint it to match more with all of the rest of the parts that I have, and put it back together, and I'm going to show you how I do that. I also think I'm going to make a different backplate for it just because I think I can make something that looks cooler than the one that's already on there, so hopefully this goes well.
Taking off the outside cover of your GPU is pretty self-explanatory. You just have to unscrew all of the screws. You need two different sizes of a fancy type of screwdriver tip to do this, and the one that I'm using comes with a whole bunch of different screwdriver tips and sizes and everything like that that are useful for a wide range of electronics, including your GPU, so I will leave a link to the screwdriver that I'm using in the description. Besides this fancy one, you also need like the tiniest Phillips head that has ever existed for the screws that are inside of the GPU. There are four really tiny Phillips head screws underneath the silver part that we just took off that we have to unscrew in order to take off the black part here. Once the black section of the cover is off, you can see that there's a small wire attaching to the GTX logo on the front that allows it to light up when it's plugged in. All you have to do is unplug that wire and then pry off the GTX logo. It's useful to disconnect the GTX logo from the black section because you can paint it separately to get it to be a different color if you want, and then the LED that shines through it will shine through in that other color besides green. And if you don't want to paint it, you still have to take it off so that you can paint the black section and allow the GTX logo to remain green. The side pieces here slide off very easily when the black section is removed and they're unscrewed. And finally, the last section of the GPU that you might want to paint is this silver part right at the end. It's a real pain to take off. You have to unscrew these two screws on the inside, and then you have to literally disconnect the entire GPU circuit board from this cooling unit, and that will require a really tiny nut driver, which I didn't happen to have. So what I did to paint it is I just taped off the entire GPU and left it on there and painted it in place. There are a whole ton of little tiny Phillips head screws holding the backplate onto the GPU, so you're going to need your Phillips head screwdriver again. Make sure you don't misplace or drop any of these screws because it'll be really hard to find them again. The four larger screws on the backplate don't actually hold the backplate on, instead they hold on the cooling unit that makes direct contact with the GPU. You can remove the backplate without actually removing these larger screws, but it's a good idea to unscrew them and take off that cooling unit that's attached to the GPU because you probably want to change the thermal paste on the GPU. Swapping out the thermal paste with some higher quality thermal paste will decrease your temperatures by a few degrees, and it's really easy to do, so it's worth it. I use Rust-Oleum paint, primer, and clear coat to paint this thing. The wait times will vary depending on what paint you use, and I definitely suggest using enamel paint. There will be directions on the paint can that you buy concerning the wait times and all of that stuff, so just follow those directions. I personally primed it and left it overnight and then painted it the next day. And I only waited like 5 or 10 minutes after painting to clear coat it. But after you clear coat it, you probably want to wait overnight again before you start handling it and putting your GPU back together. I just used an X-Acto knife to scrape off some of the paint that I wanted to keep as the silver color that came from the factory. I only did this with the GTX 1080 logo and the silver ring around the fan. These MOSFETs on the back of the GPU had thermal pads on them before I ripped off the tape and ripped off the thermal pads in the process. If the thermal pads come off of your GPU as well, just make sure you put them back on. It's very important. The GeForce logo on the front looked a little bit weird having the black around the words, so I decided to paint the black parts green. It would have been a lot easier to do this with the card taken apart so that I could just paint the GTX logo without it being already assembled, but hindsight is 20/20. Even if it looks a little bit weird when you're looking really closely at it, I think when it's lighting up it'll look just fine. I made my custom backplate out of 3mm thick cast acrylic, and I used a Dremel Moto saw to cut the acrylic and some acrylic cement to glue it all together. Actually, acrylic cement isn't really glue, it actually melts the acrylic into itself so that it's kind of more like a weld instead of glue. And it's pretty cheap too, so if you're going to be doing this kind of stuff with acrylic, just go ahead and get it instead of glue. To hold the backplate on, I'm just using double-sided 3M VHB tape. This tape is super strong, so it's going to be really difficult to take the backplate off if I ever want to do that, but I don't think I would. You can find VHB tape in stores, but it's usually a kind of thicker type, so if you want to get really thin stuff, you have to look online. And here is the finished product.
So I think it came out pretty nice. The color scheme will definitely go a lot better with all of the other components that I have inside of this computer that I'm building. If you want a little bit more detail on how I made the acrylic backplate for this GPU, there is a link in the description to a video on how to work with acrylic. As always, the tools and materials that I used in this mod are also in the description, and if you like this video and you want to see more like it, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next one.